Davao Death Squad, otherwise known as DDS. As you will have seen from the prosecution pre-confirmation brief, Mr. Duterte personally instructed Death Squad members that their mission was to kill criminals and suspected criminals, including drug users and dealers, also referred to as drug pushers. The death squads carried out this mission well into the charge period through 2011 to 2016, perpetrating the crimes charged in count 1. Your Honors, Mr. Duterte's criminal plan and his intent were no secret. He not only shared them with his co-perpetrators and members of the death squad, but also made them abundantly clear to the general public in the numerous public statements that he made time and again. During his presidential campaign, Mr. Duterte explicitly vowed to
Brigada, in the heart of changing lives. Makabagong tunay na radyo. Tunay na radyo. Angat sa musika at balita. Musika at balita. Brigada News FM.
Brigada News FM.
Broadcasting from the nation's seat of power and the vibrant capital of the Philippines, Metro Manila. Our home, our treasure, and our pride. Join the Brigada Nation Building Initiative to create sustainable jobs by attracting more travelers to discover the delightful Philippines. Be the heart of the delightful Philippines. Isang bayan, isang tahanan. Sabay-sabay nating palakasin ang tulong, trabaho at turismo. Brigada. In the heart of changing lives. This is 105.1 Brigada News FM. Brigada News FM. Manila. The Music and News Authority.
This time check is brought to you by Drive Max Capsule. Lalaking angat, tumatagal.
Siksik sa mga bagong balita. Rinig sa buong bansa. Narito na ang Drive Max Brigada Balita Nationwide mula sa Brigada News FM Manila. Drive Max. Umaangat na balita.
Ang programang ito ay hatid sa inyo ng Drive Max Capsule. Lalaking angat, tumatagal.
Sa Drive Max Brigada Balita Nationwide ngayong gabi, confirmation of charges kay dating Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte sinimulan na. Abogado ng pamilya ng mga EJK victims, kumpiyansang may sapat na ebidensya sa ICC. Libo-libong pirmang nalikom sa Tay Kami Naman campaign para kay dating Pangulong Duterte, isinumite sa Korte Suprema. Impeachment complaints laban kay VP Sara na i-refer na sa Justice Committee sa Kamara. At mga aktibidad para sa ika-40 anibersaryo ng EDSA People Power 1 nakalatag na. Seguridad sa isasabay na trilyon peso march nakahanda na.
Trimax. Bandita. Buong puso. Kasama ang buong pwersa ng Brigada News FM Philippines. In the heart of changing lives. Helping and inspiring people to achieve a better life. Kasama ang lakas ng Thrive Max Plus Herbal Capsule at resistensya ng Power Cells Herbal Capsule. Ito ang Thrive Max. Brigada Balita Nationwide. Thrive Max. Balita.
Magandang gabi Pilipinas, Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao at sa buong mundo. Mula po sa Brigada News FM Manila, heto na ang Drive Max Brigada Balita Nationwide. Ngayong araw po ng Lunes, February 23, 2026. Kami ang inyong tagapagbalita. Ako si Brigada Lay Bagyo.
Brigada Sheila Matibag.
Thrive Max. Brigada Balita Nationwide.
Mga kabrigada, makalipas po ang halos isang taon simula ng maaresto ng Interpol sa kasong Crimes Against Humanity, confirmation of charges hearing sa kaso naman ni dating Pangulong Duterte sa ICC nagsimula na. Ano po ang mga mangyayari dito sa pagdinig? At syempre nakatutok ngayon si Brigada Abner Francisco. Brigada Abner, ano na yung mga kaganapan dyan sa ICC? Ibrigada mo!
Brigada Live Report.
Brigada Lay, alas 10 ng umaga, oras sa The Hague, Netherlands, at alas 5 ng hapon, oras sa Pilipinas, ay formal nang sinimula ng 4 na araw na confirmation of charges hearing para sa kasong Crimes Against Humanity laban kay dating Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte sa International Criminal Court o ICC. Sa mga oras na ito, Brigada Lay, patuloy pa ang binabasa ni Deputy Prosecutor Mami Manchenyang ang opening statement na naglalaman ng mga akusasyon laban sa dating Pangulong Duterte sa dinidinig na kaso dyan sa ICC. Sinimula ng pagdinig sa pamamagitan ng pagpapakilala ng mga kinatawan ng prosecution, ng defense at ng mga biktima. Sinundan ito ng briefing kung ano mangyayari sa pagdinig at kung ano ang saklaw nito. Binasa ang 3 counts ng kaso na kinabibilangan ng Count 1, patayang naganap nung si Duterte ay mayor ng Davao, Count 2, patayang naganap sa buong bansa nung siya ay naging Pangulo ng Pilipinas, at Count 3, patayang naganap sa mga barangay nung si Duterte ay Pangulo pa rin ng Pilipinas. Ang kaso ay dinidinig sa Pre-Trial Chamber 1 ng ICC sa panguna ni Presiding Judge Julia Motok. Inasang tatagal ng 6 na oras ang pre-trial hearing ngayong araw kung saan bibigyan ng patas sa oras ang 3 panig upang mailahad sa hukuman ang kanilang panig. Ang 3 panig na tinutukoy natin mga kabrigada, yung prosecution na pinangungunahan ni Deputy Prosecutor Mami Manchenyang, ang depensa na pinangungunahan naman ng British-Israeli lawyer na si Attorney Nicholas Kaufman, at ang Common Legal Representative for the Victims na pinangungunahan naman ng lead counsel na si Attorney Paulina Maceda, at ng mga Pilipinong abogadong sina Attorney Joel Butoyan, Attorney Gilbert Adres at si Attorney Nukulin Arcaina. Nilinaw ni Judge Motok na ang confirmation of charges ay ginagawa hindi upang ideklara si Duterte bilang inosente o guilty, kundi ginagawa ito upang timbangin kung may matibay na ebidensya para tutuloy ang kaso sa paglilitis. Pagkatapos ngayong araw na ito mga kabrigada ay masundan pa ang pagdinig sa February 24, 26 at 27. Pagkatapos ng confirmation of charges ay inaasahang maglalabas ng resolusyon ang pre-trial chamber 1 sa loob ng 60 days kung tutuloy ba sa full-blown trial ang kaso. Batay sa Article 61 ng Rome Statute, kung may sapat na ebidensya ang kaso, tutuloy ito sa trial proper, at kung wala naman, ibabalik ang reklamo sa prosecution kung saan mga kabrigada, 2 bagay ang pwede nilang gawin. Una, manghanap ng karagdagang ebidensya para isumiti muli ang kaso. Pangalawa, amyendahan ng kaso batay sa nakalap na mga ebidensya. Tulad ng unang napaulat, mga kabrigada, tumangging humarap sa pagdinig si Duterte sa pamamagitan ng kanyang isinumiting waiver dahil hindi niya kinikilala ang jurisdiction ng ICC at ang kanyang rason na siya'y matanda na at pagod na at masina na ang kanyang katawan. Inaasang matatapos ang pagdinig mamayang alas 4 ng hapon sa The Hague at alas 11 naman ng gabi sa Pilipinas. Brigada Lay.
Brigada Abner, ano yung magiging ano nito? Di ba ngayon, parang ito yung day 1. Sa day 2, ano yung mga aasahan natin na mga magiging kaganapan na Brigada Abner?
Sa day 2, Brigada Lay, sa day 2, bibigyan ng oras yung tatlong mga partidos, yung binanggit natin, ang prosecution, ang defense, at ang common legal representative for the victims ng ngayong araw yung opening statement ng prosecution.
Opening statement
Bukas
lang.
yung opening statement ng depensa, then susundan niya ng opening statement ng panig ng mga biktima. At doon sa nalalabing 3 araw, Brigada Lay, bibigyan ng sapat na oras yung 3 panig para i-present yung mga merits ng mga iba't ibang mga kaso. So, walang inaasahang ipipresenta ng mga witnesses kasi nga yung magsasalita, yung mga representatives ng 3 mga parties, Brigada Lay.
So, kanina yung binabanggit din nung isang judge na ICC na bawal pangalanan. Kumbaga, hindi pwedeng magbanggit ng mga pangalan ng mga biktima ng sinasabing war on drugs sa Brigada Abner.
Tama yan, Brigada Lay. Yun yung mga binanggit kanina sa briefing, kumbaga yung house rules ng pre-trial chamber 1, kung ano yung magaganap, ano yung mga susundin ng mga alituntunin. So bawal yung banggitin yung mga pangalan ng mga biktima at saka ng mga witnesses for security purposes, Brigada Lay.
Oo. So sa ngayong araw wala pang kasi baka yung inaabangan ng mga kabrigada natin magkakaroon ng mga sagutan between prosecution at depensa, pero wala pang mangyayaring ganon, Brigada Abner.
Wala pang mangyayaring ganyan, Brigada Lay, kasi nga kung titingnan mo yung order of setting ng korte na inilabas noong January 26, nakalagay structured yung magiging proseso dyan sa korte. Kumbaga, bibigyan ng chance ng opening statement yung prosecution, susundan ng mga biktima at saka yung depensa. So, may allocated na oras at strictly sinasabi nun sa reminder na dapat susundin ng mga representative ng 3 mga partidos yung oras na inilaan doon sa kanilang presentation at doon sa paglalakad ng mga detalye doon sa kanilang mga akusasyon at kontra-depensa doon sa mga akusasyon na ibinabato sa dating Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte.
Okay, sige. Brigada Abner, maraming salamat. Standby lang at anytime pag may mga malalaking development dyan sa nagpapatuloy na confirmation of charges hearing sa ICC, babalikan ka namin, Brigada Abner. Maraming salamat.
Yan muna ang latest update sa confirmation of charges hearing ni dating Pangulong Duterte sa ICC. In the heart of changing lives, ako si Brigada Abdel Francisco ng 105.1 Brigada News FM Manila, the Music News Authority.
Trimax, Brigada Balita, Nationwide.
Mga kabrigada, standby lang po dahil magpapatuloy yung ating live coverage. Diyan po mga kabrigada sa confirmation of charges hearing dito sa kaso ni dating Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte. At nakalive po yan mga kabrigada sa lahat po ng Brigada News FM stations sa buong Pilipinas.
Trimax, Brigada Balita, Nationwide.
Samantala mga kabrigada, 2 kilos protesta ang naganap sa Maynila ngayong araw na parehong humihiling ng aksyon sa araw ng ICC hearing ni dating Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte sa Netherlands. Ang isa, naghahanap ng pananagutan para sa mga nadetining aktivista noong nakaraang administrasyon, habang ang isa naman ay ang pagsusumite sa Korte Suprema ng libo-libong pirma na sumusuporta kay dating Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte. Brigada Ino Flores, ibrigada mo!
Brigada Live Report.
Nagtipon ng mga taga-suporta ni dating Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte sa harap ng Supreme Court upang isumite ang libo-libong lagda na bahagi ng Tay Kami Naman signature campaign. Kasabay ito ng unang araw ng confirmation of charges hearing ng International Criminal Court hinggil sa kasong crimes against humanity na iniuugnay sa war on drugs ng nakaraang administrasyon. Sa pamamagitan ng mga nalikom na pirma, iginigiit nila sa korte na kumilos sa mga nakabinbing petisyong may kinalaman sa pag-aresto at kasulukuyang pagkakadetine ni Duterte sa ICC detention facility sa The Hague, Netherlands. Maaga pa lang ay dagsana ang mga Duterte supporters, bitbit ang kanilang mga dokumento, placards at panawagang pauwiin ang dating Pangulo. Layunin ng kampanya na pabilisin ang aksyon ng hukuman sa mga petisyong dapat umano'y mag-aatas sa Marcos administration na tumulong sa pag-uwi ng dating Pangulo mula sa kustodiya ng ICC.
Over 1 million signatures have been nakalap natin, no? And we are going to submit that to the Supreme Court because we feel that the Supreme Court right now is the last bastion of sanity in this government, no? Wala na tayong ibang choice ngayon at saka pag-aasa ngayon it's just the Supreme Court.
Samantala, nagkilos protesta naman sa harap ng Department of Justice ang iba't ibang labor groups at NGOs upang ipanawagan sa ahensya ang pagpapalaya sa 18 labor activists na nakulong sa panahon ng Administrasyong Duterte. Pinabibilis na ang pagbasura sa mga natitirang kasong itinuturing nilang trumped up at agarang palayain ng mga aktivistang patuloy na nakakulong. Kabilang dito, si Alexander Maoj Maga na isa sa unang inaresto noong Administrasyon Duterte. Si Maga ay inaresto noong February 22, 2018 sa San Mateo, Rizal matapos mahulihan ng baril habang ipinatutupad ang warrant of arrest kaugnay ng kasong murder. Bukod sa kanya, nananatili pa ring nakakulong ang ilan. In the heart of changing lives, ako si Brigada Ino Flores ng 105.1 Brigada News FM Manila. The Music News Authority.
Trimax, Brigada Balita, Nationwide.
Sa ibang mga balita mga kabrigada, yung impeachment complaints naman laban kay Vice President Sara Duterte na i-refer na sa Justice Committee dyan sa Kamara. Brigada Haji Kaaminyo, ibrigada mo!
Brigada Live Report.
Formal nang nai-refer sa House Committee on Justice ang 4 na impeachment complaints laban kay Vice President Sara Duterte. Nangyari ito sa sesyon ngayong hapon sa Kamara matapos na isama sa order of business sa plenaryo. Dahil dito, deemed initiated na ang mga reklamo laban sa Vice Presidente kaya iiral na ang 1-year bar rule. Ibig sabihin, hindi na maaaring tumanggap ng impeachment cases hanggang sa February 23, 2027. Ang mga nakatakdang isalang sa Justice Panel ay ang impeachment complaints na isinampa ng Makabayan Coalition, Tindig Pilipinas, Religious at Legal Sector at si Attorney Nathaniel Cabrera. Halos magkakapareho ang nilalaman ng kaso laban kay VP Sara, kabilang na ang umano'y maanumalyang paggastos ng 612.5 million pesos na confidential funds, hindi pagdedeklara ng yaman sa SALN at ang mga paratang ng sinasabing bagman ng pangalawang Pangulo na si Ramil Madriaga. Sa panayam naman ngayong araw, sinabi ni House Deputy Speaker Paulo Ortega V na kumpiyansa siyang makakalusot sa Justice Panel ang impeachment complaints. Naniniwala si Ortega na sa pamamagitan nito, mas mapag-uusapan, mapagdedebatehan at may engagement ang iba't ibang pananaw ng mga kongresista. Dagdag nito, mainam na hindi daanin sa shortcut route ang proseso lalo't nagkaroon na ng issue sa Korte Suprema.
Kilala nyo naman ako, kilala nyo naman ang pinagdaanan natin ng 19th Congress as part of the Quadcom, as part of the Blue, as part of the Good Gov. So, hindi na po siguro kailangan tanongin kung bakit in-endorse ako itong 4th impeachment complaint. Ang basis naman po ng mga complaints halos pareha po ng 19th Congress and I cannot speak for the entire party but yung basehan naman po niyan is napag-usapan na po, matagal na po na detalye ang mga yan, matagal na po napag-usapan.
In the heart of changing lives, ako si Brigada Haji Kaaminyo ng 105.1 Brigada News FM Manila, The Music and News Authority.
Trimax, Brigada Balita, Nationwide.
Samantala mga kabrigada, ngayong araw, kinumpirma ni Senate Committee on Foreign Relations Chairperson Senador Erwin Tulfo na tuluyan na silang nakapag-usap ni Chinese Ambassador Jing Quan. Kanilang napag-usapan, alamin sa report ni Brigada Ann Cortez. Ibrigada mo!
Brigada Live Report.
productive. Ganito nga inilarawan ni Senate Committee on Foreign Relations Chairperson Senator Erwin Tulfo ang naging resulta ng pagkikita nila ni Chinese Ambassador Jing Quan.
Open yung continuous diplomatic meetings rather than public discourse, rather than magbanatan sa on-air, social media, newspaper. Sakayon siya na sana laging gano'n, may meeting nila para to advance further itong better the relations.
Ngunit maliban pa nga rito, kabilang pa raw sa kanilang napag-usapan ay ang Code of Conduct sa pagitan ng China at ng mga ASEAN countries tulad ng Pilipinas, Malaysia, Vietnam at Brunei na inaasahan namang matatapos pagpatak ng Disyembre. Ibinahagi rin naman ng senador na pabalik na raw sa bansa ang Memorandum of Understanding sa pagitan nga ng Philippine Coast Guard at Chinese Coast Guard.
End of March, pabalik na rito yung Memorandum of Understanding between the Philippine Coast Guard and Chinese Coast Guard. Instead na magbanatan sila dun sa West Philippine Sea, South China Sea, magkaroon na lang ng cooperation like patrol, search and rescue, clean up, yung nabanggit ng Ambassador King.
Ayon kay Tulfo, na satisfied din ang kanyang mga kasamang senador sa naging resulta ng kanilang pag-uusap matapos niya itong ibahagi sa kanila. Hindi naman naalis ng senador ang posibilidad na maulit pa ang pag-uusap na ito kasama ang ilan pang senador. In the heart of changing lives, ako si Brigada Ann Cortas ng 105.1 Brigada News FM Manila, the Music News Authority.
Max, Brigada Balita Nationwide.
Mga kabrigada, nakalatag na po ang seguridad para naman sa inaasahang trilyon peso march na kasabay ng ika-40 anibersaryo ng EDSA People Power sa February 25. Mahigit 13,000 pulis naman ang ipapakalat sa Metro Manila. Brigada Kath Austria, ibrigada mo!
Brigada Live Report.
Nakahanda na ang Philippine National Police para sa mga pagtitipon kaugnay ng trilyon peso march na kasabay ng ika-40 anibersaryo ng EDSA People Power sa February 25. Tiniyak ni PNP Chief General Jose Melencio Tates Jr. na igagalang ng pulisya ang karapatan ng publiko sa mapayapang pagtitipon.
Our posture is clear. We respect constitutional rights, we ensure public safety, and we enforce the law without bias.
Nagpaalala rin ang PNP Chief sa mga pulis na manatiling professional, neutral at disiplinado at pairalin ang maximum tolerance upang maiwasan ang anumang komprontasyon.
To all deployed personnel, remain professional, neutral, and disciplined. Exercise maximum tolerance. Avoid unnecessary confrontation. Do not be provoked. The strength of a police officer is measured not by force, but by restraint and sound judgment.
Samantala, nilinaw ng National Capital Region Police Office na papayagan ang mga placard at panawagan kabilang ang BBM resign basta't walang udyok sa rebelyon o karahasan. Ayon kay NCRPO spokesperson Police Major Hazel Asilo, nakasaad ito sa Memorandum of Undertaking sa pagitan ng Quezon City Government at mga organizers ng programa na isasagawa sa White Plains Avenue sa Quezon City. Babala ng pulisya anumang paglabag sa kasunduan ay maaaring magresulta sa dispersal at pag-aresto.
Hindi naman natin kino-consider na seditious kung halimbawang sabihin nilang BBM resign, not unless meron siyang kumbaga manghihikayat ka na magkaroon ng sugurin or sunugin. Yun yung mga kino-consider natin na mga hindi magagandang statements.
Mahigit 13,000 mga pulis ang ipakakalat sa Metro Manila, bukod pa ang mga augmentation forces mula sa Police Regional Office 3 at 4A. Ito'y para matiyak ang mapayapang pagdaraos ng paggunita ng People Power Anniversary. In the heart of changing lives, ako si Brigada Kath Austria ng 105.1 Brigada News FM Manila, the Music and News Authority.
Trimax, Brigada Balita Nationwide.
At mga kabrigada, inyo na pong napakinggan ang DriveMax Brigada Balita Nationwide.
Mga trending na balitang kinalap ng Brigada News FM Philippines, katuwang ang DriveMax Plus Herbal Capsule.
Buong puso kasama ang buong puwersa ng Brigada News FM Philippines in the heart of changing lives, helping and inspiring people to achieve a better life. Kami po ang inyong lingkod. Ako si Brigada Lay Bagyo.
At Brigada Sheila Matibag.
Mga kabrigada, standby po at magbabalik tayo sa ating live coverage dito po sa confirmation hearing sa kaso naman ni dating Pangulong Duterte dyan po sa ICC. Standby mga kabrigada.
The prosecution further relies on official government document, including material from the Philippine National Police. It relies on drug watch list, on audio and video material, as well as on forensic and financial evidence. Your Honors, during the prosecution's subsequent presentation, my colleague will elaborate on some of these core evidence in more detail. Mr. Nichols will give a presentation on Mr. Duterte's background, followed by an overview of the evidence demonstrating his responsibility for the crime charged in count 1. This will be followed by the presentation of Mr. Jeremy behind me, who will speak about the evidence demonstrating Mr. Duterte's responsibility as President for the crime charged in count 2 entry. And Ms. Croft, on my left, will then elaborate on the contextual element of crime against humanity and the mode of liability through which Mr. Duterte is responsible for the crimes alleged in this case. And to conclude, Madam President, Your Honor, while this court cannot reunite victim with their loved one, it can help reveal the truth about what happened to them and bring a sense of justice to the victim. The charge before you today are serious, and the evidence submitted require their confirmation. And Mr. Duterte must be held to account, and this case should be confirmed for trial. I thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Prosecutor. Now we are slightly in advance on our schedule. I will now hand over to the legal representative of victims for her opening statements until 11, and then after that you shall continue. Please proceed, ma'am.
Madam President, Your Honors, by way of an opening statement, we convey the views and concerns of the 497 victims authorized to participate in these proceedings. At the outset, Your Honors, we communicate the very deep disappointment of the victims at the decision allowing Rodrigo Duterte not to be present in this stage of confirmation of charges. The sight of Mr. Duterte being read and being confronted with the grave and horrible charges against him would have constituted a vital component of justice for the victims. This case symbolically represents the last boat that the victims can board to go on a journey in search of justice for their loved ones who were brutally killed upon the orders of Mr. Duterte. If this chamber prevents the boat from sailing by not confirming the charges, the victims will forever be moored in an island where the nights are filled with the screams and cries of their massacred loved ones. There is absolutely no other recourse for the victims. No less than former Philippine Justice Secretary Crispin Remulla admitted just a few months ago that the door to domestic justice is permanently closed for victims of the Duterte extrajudicial killings. Remulla declared, and we quote, "It is difficult to prove the case here and build up the case because those who need to speak are involved in the crime. There's nothing, not even a police report. You don't have a scene of the crime, you don't have ballistics, you don't have DNA." Remulla further declared, and I quote, "Everything that could be erased was erased so that the cases would not push through. That is why this has reached the ICC." Under the Philippine justice system, Your Honors, no criminal case can reach the courts unless they are initiated and filed by the Department of Justice or the Office of the Ombudsman. From Justice Secretary, Remulla has been appointed as Ombudsman. So the two gatekeepers of justice are successively occupied by a ranking official who has declared that there is absolutely no hope for domestic justice for the victims. If the charges are not confirmed in this case, one of the gravest concerns of the victims is that Mr. Duterte will return to the Philippines as a conquering hero. He will resume preaching his gospel of impunity. In fact, if Mr. Duterte could threaten to slap the judges of this court, which he did while he was president, this chamber should imagine the kind of terror-filled threats and the violent actions that can easily be used against the victims if the suspect walks free from this court. If the charges are not confirmed, it is a very serious concern of the victims that Mr. Duterte will be portrayed in history by his multitude of followers as the leader who vanquished the ICC and who cleansed his country of 30,000 rapists, murderers, and dangerous criminals, which were the scornful words he sweepingly used against all those who were killed in his murderous spree. Your Honors, Mr. Duterte has been in detention here in The Hague for almost a year now, but there has been no peace and rest for the victims. From the time their loved ones were killed and continuously up to this time, they lived in constant fear for their lives. The arrest and detention of Mr. Duterte has not stopped impunity in the Philippines. The virus of impunity that he spread all over the country has become a cancer that has metastasized, infecting millions of Filipinos. Mr. Duterte has created clones of himself. He converted millions of peace-loving citizens into bloodthirsty disciples who have become converts to the belief that violence and killings are valid solutions to societal problems. The killings masterminded by Mr. Duterte continue to have consequences for the victims even to this day because of his clones. These mini Dutertes harass, threaten, or commit outright violence against the victims and their families. As shown by the number of victims participating in this proceeding so far, many still fear to come out and tell their stories of how their lives became a living hell as a result of Mr. Duterte's crimes and because they are constantly terrified of being targeted with violence by Duterte fanatics. Many victims have been hesitant to participate in this ICC case because they live in communities that thrive with Duterte clones. They see the halls of power of their country teeming with Duterte disciples. They see and hear senators, congresspersons, mayors, governors, and powerful public figures who are mini Dutertes. The daughter of Mr. Duterte is the Vice President, and she has just recently declared that she is running for President in 2028. One Duterte son is a congressman. Another is the Davao City Mayor, and his grandchildren occupy positions of power. The plague of impunity has spread not only among Filipinos in the Philippines, but even among expatriate Filipinos in faraway lands like here in The Hague. When we reported to the victims that we, their external legal representatives, feel like fugitives.
Apologies, Counsel, it's 11 o'clock.
When we reported to the victims that we, their external legal representatives, feel like fugitives who avoid our own countrymen here in The Hague,
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Council. We will now take a half-hour break as provided for in the schedule, and you shall resume your remarks at 11:30. These are the rules that are set in the schedule, which was set in paragraph 18 of the decision.
reported to the victims that we, their external legal representatives, feel like fugitives who avoid our own countrymen here in The Hague because chances are they are Duterte clones. They express their utmost concern that if we, their lawyers, feel threatened by mini Dutertes in a foreign country, we should imagine the far more intense fear they live with every day in their communities teeming with mini Dutertes. The victims also wish to convey that if the judges of this honorable chamber can be subjected to online harassment by Duterte clones, we should imagine the level of vulnerability the victims are exposed to in their poor villages. Your Honors, there is only one solution to stop the impunity propagated by Mr. Duterte from continuing to bring harm and suffering to the victims. And that is for this honorable chamber to confirm the charges so that witnesses can testify and evidence can be presented on the horrible crimes committed by Mr. Duterte. The testimonies and evidence presented will inoculate these mini Dutertes from the virus of impunity that has infected them. When they will see and hear the utter cruelty, the sheer brutality, in other words, the brazen inhumanity of the crimes committed by Mr. Duterte, and the humanity of those whose lives were violently taken, it will rekindle the embers of humanity that still remain in their hearts. Many of these mini Dutertes or Duterte clones are actually victims of massive doses of fake news widely circulated online. They need to be vaccinated with the truth, and the truth vaccine can only come from the testimonies of victims and evidence presented in a trial before this court. Truth is the antidote to the virus of impunity, Your Honors. The victims dread a future where charges are not confirmed in this case. It will mean that the virus of impunity will continue to spread and infect many more. Victims fear that Duterte clones will become an even bigger group that can elect another apostle of impunity as the Philippines' next leader. If that happens, an even more serious condition of impunity can take place in the Philippines, possibly worse than the orgy of violence that happened from 2011 to 2019, and this time there will be no ICC to run to for assistance and help. The victims humbly beseech this honorable chamber to reaffirm the two crucial objectives of the ICC identified in the preamble of the Rome Statute. First, to prosecute and punish the most serious crimes that deeply shock the conscience of humanity. And second, to put an end to impunity and to contribute to the prevention of crimes of unimaginable atrocities. If this chamber confirms the charges, this court will achieve its first objective of prosecuting and, if convicted, punishing Mr. Duterte for the unspeakable crimes he is charged with. But achieving the first objective will not automatically make this court attain its second objective. Merely putting forward the evidence gathered and the theory of liability of the prosecution will not necessarily resolve the second objective. This court should allow victims to testify, and the record of the proceedings must reflect the harrowing experiences of those impacted by against humanity. It is the and the brutality. In other words, the utter inhumanity of the crimes masterminded by Mr. Duterte, so that the people who adore and idolize him, the people who have become disciples of impunity, will see for themselves the inhumanity of the suspect. For this to happen, the charges should all be confirmed. The virus of impunity that has spread all over the Philippines is very grave and serious, Your Honors. Imagine a leader like Mr. Duterte, who proudly and publicly proclaimed his aspirations of following the footsteps of Adolf Hitler when he said, quote, "Hitler massacred 3 million Jews. Now there are 3 million drug addicts. I'd be happy to slaughter them," unquote. And yet, he is worshipped by a huge number of Filipinos. In so many countries, you will need to hide your adoration of Hitler. Mr. Duterte flaunted it, and his fanatics are unaffected by it. Mr. Duterte has pronounced so many other horrible declarations meant to promote and encourage impunity, as it will be detailed tomorrow by my colleagues. And yet, he is idolized by a multitude of Filipinos. The defense will claim that he was merely bombastic and acerbic when he made these statements. But if he were merely being pompous and flippant, the people who were killed should be alive and laughing today at his supposed pranks and stunts. Mr. Duterte did not only order the mass killing of people suspected of being drug personalities, Your Honors. He smeared them with accusations of being rapists, murderers, and dangerous criminals. Mr. Duterte imposed an inflexible condemnation that if you are a drug personality, you are automatically a dangerous criminal who has engaged in unimaginable atrocities. The families of those killed did not only suffer the loss of a loved one, their families were even disgraced with being associated with a rapist, murderer, or dangerous criminal. Even after their loved ones were murdered, many families were subjected to deplorable injustices. Instead of gunshot wounds as cause of death in their death certificates, families were shocked to see pneumonia, heart attack, stroke, sepsis, and other false causes of death that were instead written down. Other families were charged substantial amounts, sums the impoverished families could not afford, just to retrieve the bodies of their loved ones from the funeral parlor who were suspected by the families of being in cahoots with the police officers. Some family members were even arrested and imprisoned by police officers on false charges and for the purpose of preventing them from complaining. In one particular incident, Your Honors, a young man and his common-law wife were sleeping in their shanty when men in civilian clothes knocked down the door to their house. The men dragged the wife out of the room. The husband was already surrendering, and he even started to strip naked to show he had no drugs or firearm on his body. He said in the Filipino language, "Sir, malinis po ako, maghuhubad ako, sir." Translation in English, "Sir, I am clean. I will strip naked, sir." Still without mercy, the men shot and killed him. After killing the husband, they arrested the wife and accused her with falsified and non-bailable charges. When the deceased mother and cousin went to the police station to find out what happened to the young man, because they were not in the scene of the crime when it happened, the two were also summarily arrested and charged with fabricated crimes. If the Honorable Chamber confirms the charges in this case, the witnesses and evidence will show that those who were smeared by Mr. Duterte before they were killed, they were inside their houses, sleeping peacefully with their families, eating meals with their loved ones, playing with their children, or hugging their wives. Others were merely walking along the street, having snacks at the roadside eatery, or plying the road, earning a poor man's living. They were all doing ordinary, peaceful, and plain human activities. Confirming the charges will restore the dignity of those who were killed and the honor of their families. The prejudice suffered by the families of those killed did not begin and end with the killings of their loved ones. Each killing set off a chain reaction that is continuously churning out a daily crucible of harm, damage, and loss. By masterminding the mass murder of mere suspects, Mr. Duterte has brought irreparable and endless harm to the families. An overwhelming majority of those killed were the sole breadwinners of poor families. These families were dependent on each day's wage for their daily sustenance. They were hand-to-mouth families. With the death of their breadwinners, the widowed spouses, a majority of whom are women, have had to take on the roles of two parents. On top of taking care of their children and maintaining the household, the widowed spouses now have the additional burden of being breadwinners for their families. Families have been driven to even far more serious destitution, Your Honors. The damage to the children is immeasurable. Their development and upbringing have been permanently compromised. They have been walking through life with one missing parental limb. Losing a parent under very dire economic conditions and under the most violent circumstances results in wounds that will never heal and that will absolutely render them handicapped for life. And then there's the indescribable anguish of parents who lost a child. No parent is supposed to outlive a child. Parents suffer a lifetime of grief when a child dies ahead of them, and the lifetime grief is unimaginably worse when a child dies under the most inhuman circumstances. The crimes masterminded by Mr. Duterte did not only affect individuals but whole communities. Across the Philippines, numerous urban communities of the most impoverished villages were scarred by the violence and abuses wrought by a lawless anti-drug campaign that further worsened the misery and trauma of residents in marginalized communities. In one illustrative instance, Your Honors, after the father of a family was killed inside his house by police officers, the entire neighborhood was so traumatized that for almost 3 months, and during the coldest months in the Philippines, they abandoned their houses at night and instead slept in the open public market. They did not feel secure inside their houses because there would be no witnesses if the police would just barge in and shoot at them. In the public market, the presence of many witnesses, they thought, will deter the police from shooting and killing them. It is also the victim's view, Your Honors, that the charges should be confirmed because the resulting presentation of witnesses and evidence during the trial will force police and other law enforcement officers to confront the brazen depravity of the killing of civilians that they either personally committed or allowed to be committed during the Duterte reign of terror. In one operation, the police summarily killed 3 men, 2 brothers and 1 friend, in the very early morning. The police declared that the 3 were nanlaban. They fought back. But the neighbors saw otherwise. The whole neighborhood was so horrified at the macabre treatment of one of the fatalities. The bullet-ridden body of one of the 3 men was brought out from the 2nd floor window and dropped to the ground because the police could not bring the body out through the doorway. When the body hit the ground, the neighbors recoiled at hearing the body emit a cry, aray, translation in English, ouch. The man was still alive when his body was thrown to the ground, and the police just left him to bleed to death. The trial will hold a mirror to the police force and compel them to see how they were turned into executioners and assassins, and their organization transformed into a gigantic criminal organization or turned into a killing machine by Mr. Duterte. The Philippine National Police and the drug enforcement agencies have not made any initiative to purify the corrupted minds of their officers and personnel to our knowledge. The trial in this case will be a tremendous teaching opportunity that can work to rectify the warped and depraved minds of Philippine security officers. The charges need to be confirmed, Your Honors, for the sake of the entire country, which has been desensitized or made numb by the massive incidents of impunity and the glorification of impunity promoted by Mr. Duterte. The whole Philippines needs to know the real story during those bloody years. There has been no opportunity for the entire country to really find out the whole truth of what happened. It has been hush-hush, tidbits of sporadic news, and always drowned out by trolls who mass produce and broadcast false, fake, and fabricated news. The victims also attach a very important historical significance to this case. If the Chamber confirms the charges, the trial proceedings will produce a historical record of the most bloody period of post-war Philippine history, a duty that the Philippine justice system has refused to perform. The historical account on the mass murder of so many Filipinos during the Duterte regime needs to be accessible to our future generations, just like the Nuremberg trials and the Tokyo trials, so that they will learn from it and not repeat the same mistake of selecting and glorifying leaders who preach and practice impunity. The prosecution has presented 78 instances of murder and attempted murder, clarifying that these incidents are only representatives of the extent of the crimes committed against thousands of civilians, Your Honors. The victims beseech the Honorable Chamber to remember that Mr. Duterte's bloody rule, both in Davao City and nationwide, resulted in as many as 30,000 victims of killings, more than 300,000 victims of arbitrary imprisonment, and unaccounted numbers of victims of torture, sexual assault, and other forms of crimes against humanity. For many families in the Philippines, the charges brought for confirmation in these proceedings represent only a fraction of the reality the victims have endured. The victims beseech the Honorable Chamber to remember the hundreds of thousands of victims are banking on vicarious justice from this case. Finally, Your Honors.
Excuse me, Counsel, you have 5 minutes left.
Thank you. Finally, Your Honors, the victims wish to humbly underline that what is ultimately at stake in these proceedings is the supreme of all forms of human rights, the right to life. The right to life is the very foundation of every civilized society. The ancestors of every nation fought against invaders, colonizers, despotic monarchs, and fascist leaders in order to secure the right to life of their families, their communities, and the future generations. The heroes of every country sacrificed their lives to defend the right to life of their people. We as citizens of modern societies are inheritors and beneficiaries of the sacrifices of our ancestors who bequeathed to us the right to life. We owe it to them to defend the supreme legacy for our generation and for the generations to come. For the past few years, Your Honors, we have seen an increasing number of nation leaders who time-traveled from the Dark Ages and now swagger in modern times as if they own people's lives. These brutal and cruel leaders must be held to account for their brazen disregard of humankind's right to life. Our ancestors fought in the battlefield to secure a right to life. In these modern times, the battleground for the fight to protect our right to life is within the four walls of this honorable court. May the God of life, the God of humanity, guide the honorable members of this chamber. Thank you, Your Honors.
Merci beaucoup, Maître Judge Motog. Thank you very much, Counsel Butulyan. Now over to the defence. Mr. Kaufman, please.
And I thank Mr. Tuyan for his intervention, but I feel that I ought to remind him that this is a court of law which decides matters on the basis of evidence, not on the basis of political demagoguery, and not on the basis of a desire to effect regime change despite the democratic will. And certainly not on the basis of statements made by Ombudsman Jesus Crispin Remulla, who professed that domestic justice will be denied, according to Mr. Butuyan, because of the lack of forensic reports and police reports. Now, I don't know which case Mr. Butuyan's metaphorical ship sailed into, but he clearly hasn't read the evidence. Whilst he was speaking, we examined the evidence, and out of that evidence we found at least 35 reports substantiating 49 of the incidents which are mentioned in a document containing the charges. Your Honours, Rodrigo Duterte was and will always remain a unique phenomenon. His style of statesmanship was novel and unpalatable to many. His expletives and hyperbole grated, while his honesty and wild popularity irritated. He spoke openly, from the heart, sincerely and truthfully. And what a contrast between him and his successor in the Malacanang. For President Rudy, his word was his word, and the people knew it. For President Bong Bong, his word is for the wind, and the people will not forget it. Let me remind everyone of the letter which President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. signed, it's on the screen, and in which he gave a cast-iron undertaking that his government, and I quote, will not assist the ICC in any way, shape or form. Well, as we know, he failed to keep that promise. Rodrigo Duterte was unconstitutional and unceremoniously hauled off to The Hague. And when called upon to defend his master's actions and the said letter at a Senate committee hearing, the then Secretary for Justice, once again Mr. Jesus Crispin Remulla, persisted with the same dishonest theme. And I quote his words, "We did not assist the ICC. We continue with the very tenor of the letter that we did not assist the ICC and we did not have any contact with them." So he said, but with a document emanating from the prosecution team opposite and disclosed to us a mere week ago, not as information material to the preparation of our defence, but as exonerating evidence, we can now substantiate what we have suspected for a long time. The document comprises a transcript of a telephone call covertly recorded between 4 parties who cannot be mentioned in public, and one of these parties was boasting about how he was acting as the silent partner of President BBM, managing a scheme to funnel witnesses to this court while all the time ensuring that he could guarantee President BBM's plausible deniability. So it is indeed the defence case that President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. set out to neutralise Rodrigo Duterte and his legacy. Yes, Mr. Deputy Prosecutor, I used that legendary word, neutralise, so central and so essential to your case theory, because you know just as well as me that I'm using the term metaphorically. And now I turn to the substance of the charges, but before I do, a word or two about the geopolitical context. The scourge of illegal narcotics is not unique to the Philippines. As we all know, it afflicts Latin America, where I can name 3 countries where the death rate at the hands of vigilantes and law enforcement agents per capita population is higher than it ever was under Duterte. And as you should know, and you will hear from the prosecution, at any rate, the Philippines as a country is uniquely positioned to act as a transit hub for the trafficking of narcotics emanating from the cartels in China. And with or without Duterte, so we argue, the death rate would have kept on rising. Indeed, as we will prove with statistics and reports, the death rate flowing from narcotics-related crime actually increased after Rodrigo Duterte left. narcotics-related crime actually increased after Rodrigo Duterte left power. And where, I ask you, has the International Criminal Court been seen that Rodrigo did anything? The totally lawful Duterte campaign against illegal drugs and their suppliers took place when his administration was his pleasures were to be found not on the cocktail party circuit of Forbes Park, but on coastal roads where he roamed and cruised on his motorcycle, not looking for people to kill Mr. Prosecutor, but almost killing himself because of his love for speed. This is the man who paid and paved his way through law school, passing his bar exam in 1972, more or less on the same day as Marcos Sr.'s tanks were grinding and rolling their way through the streets after the declaration of martial law. And it was on that significant day that Rodrigo Duterte was exposed to the tyranny of oppression and the abuse of power by the elite. And he took a decision. On that day, he chose to devote himself to a life of selfless public service. As a professor at the local police academy and as a public prosecutor in Davao, Rodrigo Duterte developed a lifelong passion, some would say an enduring obsession, for law and order, something for which he unapologetically enforced throughout his time as mayor of Davao City. Not, as the prosecution say, through sowing murder and mayhem, but through winning the love, respect, and admiration of his fellow citizens, the very same citizens who continued to re-elect him time after time, term after term, on no less than 7 occasions over more than 2 decades. And throughout his 20 or so years tenure as the mayor of Davao, Rodrigo Duterte and his family transformed that city from an outpost of communist insurgency and criminal violence into what is now one of the safest cities, not just in the Philippines, but in the entire world. This was indeed the so-called Davao model, which the prosecution wants to persuade you was code for unbridled criminal violence. And this was the type of leader that the Filipino nation wanted in 2016. So, Rodrigo Duterte was elected into power, not in spite of, but specifically because of his firm and uncompromising commitment to upholding law and order. And after his election as president, Rodrigo Duterte remained a man of the people without seeking to patronize the people. Gung-ho in his ways and with a belligerent tone, he spoke the tough tongue of the street, not the dissembling discourse of international diplomacy. He said what the people wanted to hear, but he said it in a way that offended sensibilities of world leaders unaccustomed to hearing it, one in particular, and that was what set him on the slippery slope to a prison cell in The Hague. And let me tell you how it works. It starts with the media, controlled by the powerful and the politically influential. With a sensational headline and a twisted editorial slant, the moguls sell their papers while promoting the partisan agenda of their backers in power. They highlight the salacious content while ignoring the true context, because that is what captivates the reader. And so it was with Rodrigo Duterte, whose speeches were fertile fodder for his enemies and detractors. A man whose hyperbole, bluster and rhetoric, once published, became a natural target for privately funded NGOs and human rights activists, a loose collective more commonly known as civil society. These people descended upon the Philippines to advance an agenda even more lacking in objectivity than that of the media, and heavily funded by tycoons with even grander designs, they print their glossy reports, replete with iconic photographic images of grieving families and dead bodies in rain-swept, nighttime crime scenes, all dramatically illuminated with the fluorescent glow of neon. Images carefully crafted to shock the conscience and to sway the emotions, and, I may say, to be used by the prosecutor when they don't even relate to the charges. And they gave their slick reports bold titles lifted straight out of a James Bond movie, such as License to Kill, One Shot to the Head, You Can Die Any Time, or simply, They Just Kill. The photographers are fated and their shots exhibited as art all over the world, and the brave journalists who act as their sources win awards and Nobel Prizes. And slowly but surely, their narrative becomes the sacred, unchallengeable, and unshakable truth. And so the pressure builds up, and the academics who haunt the corridors of the progressive left law faculties far away in the United States tweet their research and publish their articles pontificating about crimes against humanity, systematic attacks against the civilian population, and they point their finger at one man alone, and bandy about slogans such as accountability and the prevention of impunity. They give their gratuitous advice on what should be done, sometimes academics who formerly worked alongside the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. Communications and complaints are filed, and the rest, as they say, is history. In any event, we're not gathered here today to judge a man on the basis of his coarse attitude or his vulgar language. This court has convened a confirmation hearing to verify whether substantial grounds exist to believe that Rodrigo Duterte, the people's president, together with various so-called co-perpetrators, over the years of his governance, devised a criminal policy of wholesale and wanton murder. And since we are in a court of law, it is worth stressing, although I should not have to, cases are decided on the basis of evidence, not supposition, not rumor, not spicy gossip, and certainly not on the basis of political rhetoric and bluster. Because at the end of the day, were it not for those belligerent and controversial speeches, there would have been no impetus to bring the people's president to The Hague. And when the prosecution's evidence is examined, I would ask you to keep an open mind and to question not just whether that evidence has been selectively presented, but whether there exists evidence which the prosecution has failed to produce. And I say this with justifiable cause, particularly with respect to the Duterte rhetoric, as we will prove during the substantive part of our submissions. The notorious speeches on which the prosecution relies have been cherry-picked to suit its narrative while ignoring the many other speeches when the former president tempered his bombastic language by clear reference to the principle of lawful self-defense. We, the defence, have read as many of these speeches as we can find. In fact, in our poky little office on the top floor of the furthest building away in this complex, we have a counter which ticks and ticks. And whenever we come across a speech which contradicts the prosecution's murder theory by reference to self-defence, we give a cheer. And the counter goes up once more, and we celebrate one more nail in the coffin of the prosecution's case theory. As the statistics stand as of today, in contrast to the 20 speeches on which the prosecution relies to prove incitement to kill, we have found 35 more which say the complete opposite. Let me give you 2 examples from the very speeches that the Deputy Prosecutor himself cited today. Let's refer first of all to the famous Pietà speech, which the Deputy Prosecutor referred to. So, this is what the Deputy Prosecutor said. Those of you who are still sober, those who haven't tried illegal drugs, if you don't want to die or get hurt, don't rely on the priests, including human rights advocates. They won't be able to prevent deaths, and so it goes on. But if we look further on in the very same speech, something which maybe the Deputy Prosecutor didn't do, this is what he had to say. To our police officers and other officials, do your job, and you will have the unwavering support of the Office of the President. I will be with you all the way. Abuse your authority, and there will be hell to pay, for you will have become worse than criminality itself. Well, there you are. You have it straight in your face. PECSO, exonerating evidence within what is claimed to be the prosecution incriminating evidence. I won't take up my time by showing you the second speech, but there is one. If I have time at the end, I will show it to you. So if you add to that another 10 speeches out of the 20 speeches on which the prosecution rely in its document containing the charges, after all, we are in a court of law and we rely on evidence. And what is the evidence that's produced of these speeches? 20 of them. 10 of them, I submit, and we will show this in the substantive part of our submissions, contain exonerating evidence which support the defence case theory. In other words, if you add the 10 which we've identified in the prosecution's 20, to our total of 35, we come to 45 speeches versus 10, which we say support the use of force only in self-defence. That is 350% more speeches in favour of our defence and 354% more reasons not to confirm the charges. And you can bet your bottom dollar that at the end of today's proceedings, either the victim's self-styled legal assistant to ICC counsel or a prosecution intern will be tasked with scouring the web, looking for the means to prove Kaufman wrong. And I will declare it, and I'll declare it loudly and clearly, as if the prosecution didn't know it already. It's not enough to state that since the former president made those extremely inflammatory statements and deaths occurred, that he must, as a matter of course, be criminally responsible for those fatalities. At this stage of the proceedings, the prosecution needs to show substantial grounds to believe that the former president actually desired and foresaw that people would be killed as a result of his incendiary language. For the prosecution to assert that Rodrigo Duterte hoped for deaths to occur or was recklessly indifferent as to whether deaths would occur, which he was not, that's insufficient. So once more for the record, Rodrigo Duterte's language was aimed not at suspected drug pushers as the prosecution would have it, but directly at those poisoning society with their substances, and not, I stress, with lethal intent. His rhetoric was calculated to arouse fear and obedience, to instill fear in their hearts, and to inculcate a respect for the law in their minds. Nothing more, nothing less. That was his intent, and it was not criminal. And as many of these drug pushers demanded to enter prison, I remember seeing the images on the television, lining up to surrender and to enter prison. Now, I challenge my colleagues opposite to prove otherwise, because as we all know, in a criminal process, the burden of proof is on the prosecution. They brought this case and they need to prove it. Rodrigo Duterte need not convince the world of anything, and that is to his fortunate advantage given his current medical condition. He stands behind his legacy resolutely, and he maintains his innocence absolutely. Now, I turn to the general fairness and objectivity of the investigation, which, as we all know, is meant to be an impartial evidence-gathering exercise. As an ex-prosecutor myself, I'm used to investigating agencies pursuing all reasonable lines of inquiry, assimilating all testimonies, and digesting all documentation and forensic evidence, recommending who to target for prosecution, but not so with this prosecution. When we, the defense, study the course of the investigation in this case, one thing is plain as a pikestaff. The chief prosecutor of this court, Mr. Karim Khan, not only failed miserably to carry out his duties under the Rome Statute, requiring him to examine exonerating circumstances as well as incriminating, but he single-handedly contaminated it, so we alleged, by pursuing a one-track crusade with a view to a predetermined objective. Let me explain. Although the ICC officially authorized an investigation into the so-called Philippines situation in late 2021, it was deferred a few months later back to the Philippines for the official investigation to resume only in late 2023. But the real meat of the investigation into Count 1, relating to the activities of that fictitious construct, the Davao Death Squad, had effectively started way before then, with the sole objective of nailing Rodrigo Duterte. Indeed, all the way back in 2018, during its so-called preliminary examination, the prosecution had an individual who will be referred to as P1, handed to them on a silver platter. This P1 had been interviewed at an earlier date by none other than Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan, in his former capacity as a private lawyer, and the self-professed legal Rodrigo Duterte's role as the mobster-in-chief. The same does scream objectivity, doesn't it? I say that sarcastically, of course. Fortunately for us, the defence, the appeals chamber, has now disqualified Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan from this case. A welcome development as a matter of ethical propriety, but in our opinion, too late in the day to salvage the integrity of the investigation that he had supervised. An investigation in the course of which he concealed his former role as the victim's counsel, who had deemed our client a suspected murderer as far back as 2018 and right up to the very day before this pre-trial chamber issued its arrest warrant. Your Honours, over the next few days, we hope to convince you of the wholly insufficient nature of the evidence against Rodrigo Duterte. We will show you that the paltry number of speeches on which the prosecution rely do not manifest criminal intent. We will also convince you that as hard as they tried, the prosecution's investigators couldn't get even one of its criminal cooperating witnesses, whose reliability is next to zero, to admit that they heard the former president, Rodrigo Duterte, give an order to kill at any time relevant to the charges, or with respect to any of the incidents. And we hope that when you conclude your deliberations, Your Honours, that you will dismiss these grievously misplaced and politically motivated charges. We will ask you to send Rodrigo Duterte back to his family, and we will ask you to give back to the Filipino people their tatay digong. Thank you, Your Honours.
The presiding judge. Thank you very much, Mr. Kaufman. We shall now suspend. This is the end of initial statements, and this is the end of this morning's hearings. We will take a 90-minute break and resume at 2 in the afternoon. Thank you very much.